I'd like to be mindful of everybody's time today, so noting that it is 1:30, we will get started. Welcome everyone to our webinar on the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund. I'm Danita Welch. I'm the Manager for Local Government Program Services at UBCM, and I'll be moderating today. So just a quick round of introductions. I've just introduced myself. We have Sasha and Lindsay with us today, two of our program officers for the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund. You can see Rebecca's picture there. Unfortunately, Rebecca was not able to join us today. And we will, when we get to the Q&A portion, we will also have one of our provincial colleagues join us, Robin Johansson, who is with Emergency Management and Climate Readiness. So I'd like to start off with a territorial acknowledgement. I'd like to acknowledge that we are grateful to be living and working on the traditional territories of the Lekwungen-speaking people, represented today by the Esquimalt and Songhees Nation. At least for myself, Sasha, and Lindsay, that's the territory we're on today, and would like to welcome folks joining us around the province to take a moment to reflect on the territories that you're joining from. So moving to the agenda for today, we're going to look at a little bit of housekeeping in terms of the webinar functionality. We will have a bit of a program overview. I'll be speaking to some of the key changes and future intakes under the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund. And then I'm going to hand it over to Sasha and Lindsay, and they're going to walk everyone through the funding streams that are open for applications right now. We'll take a few minutes to talk about tips and tricks for applying for funding for the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund, but honestly, more broadly for the funding programs that UBCM administers. And then, as always, our plan will be to leave as much time as possible for questions. So housekeeping, you would have noticed when you joined that the webinar is being recorded. We will make the recording and the slide deck available after the webinar, and we will notify folks when that's available. We will be answering all questions through the Q&A function, and the Q&A function only, more or less. So if you're not familiar with Teams, at least on my screen, you're going to look at the toolbar to the top, kind of in the center, you'll see the Q&A box. That will open up a side panel where you can type in your questions. We do ask people to, think about questions that would have a broad applicability to other folks on the call, and to try to shy away from questions that are very specific to, a specific project in your community. We have disabled the chat, so that is not an option. If you are having any types of challenges with getting your questions into the Q&A or any other issues, please raise your hand. It's a little button at the top. It looks just like a hand. And one of our program staff, either Claudia or Christina, will be able to acknowledge you and unmute your microphone, and you'll be able to ask your question that way when we get to the Q&A. So just to start with a quick program overview. So Community Emergency Preparedness Fund, been around since 2017 now, funded by the province. Immensely grateful that, the fund has been upwards of $368 million. UBCM is the administrator, working with the folks at EMCR and also the Office of the Fire Commissioner and also BC Wildfire Service for the purpose of the Volunteer Fire Department funding stream. In terms of eligibility, the CEPF, the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund, is open to all First Nations and all local governments in BC. Also recognizing that, again, under the Volunteer Fire Department funding stream, society-run volunteer fire departments and improvement districts that operate a fire service are also eligible applicants. So lots on this this slide. This is just to give a bit of context for the overall Community Emergency Preparedness Fund. So we have had multiple funding streams, some of which, as are noted here, have been closed and are no longer available. One that's coming soon, which we'll speak to in a little bit. And then the balance are all the funding streams that remain open and that our program staff are going to speak to in just a few minutes. So some key changes and a bit of a moment to pause and think about what's happening for the next few years with CEPF. So in terms of key changes, and when I say key changes, I mean in the program guides that have come out to support the intakes in the balance of this fiscal year. Um, so a big change is most of the program guides are now prescriptive. And what that means is, generally speaking, only the activities that are listed in Table 1 for the fire department funding stream, it's actually multiple tables, are eligible for funding. So not as flexible as previous, really are encouraging applicants to have a good look at Table 1 and do their best to only include activities that are in Table 1 in their applications and budget. For most of the funding streams, for the last couple of years, the intake grant maximums have been 40,000. Unfortunately, those have been reduced to 30,000 for the funding streams this round and moving forward for the next few intakes, with the exception of public notification and evacuation route planning, which has stayed at 40,000. And then we will talk about the new foundations of disaster risk reduction on a slide coming up. There will be different grant maximums there. So for the programs that primarily or include the purchase of equipment, so primarily volunteer fire departments, ESS and EOC, you'll see that the program guides are using the term essential equipment. So we really are encouraging applicants to focus on including equipment in their applications that's absolutely critical to the function of their EOC, their ESS program, or their fire department. Again, looking at there's less dollars available, really wanting to see that focus on critical purchases. We are going to look at a table just on the next slide that gives an outline of the intakes that have been confirmed over the next 3 years, but did want to highlight that under the current funding, we have one more intake in October at the end of this month for fire departments, and then in the winter for Indigenous cultural safety, and no other intakes are being planned for those funding streams under the current dollars that are available for the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund. And then the last bullet, we are expecting the intakes that are going to be competitive. We are expecting, at least fire departments, likely ESS and EOC, are going to be oversubscribed, if not highly oversubscribed. So again, our best guidance is really to go back to Table 1, make sure your applications are only including eligible activities, and really being concise and focused on the intent of the funding streams. So the table I was talking to, I'm not sure how well this actually shows up on the slide deck for those of you participating, but we did provide this information in the Compass, UBCM's weekly newsletter, in about mid-August. But we did want to give folks some certainty of what the CEPF will look like for the next 3 years. So what you can see here is ESS and EOC have 3 intakes planned. The new funding stream, Foundations of Disaster Risk Reduction, has 2 intakes planned. As I mentioned, Indigenous cultural safety and volunteer fire departments have 1 remaining intake each, and we are intending to run 2 intakes for public notification and evacuation route planning. So with that, I'm going to hand the slide deck over to Lindsay, who's going to talk about some of our funding streams.
Super, thank you, Danita. All right, so I'll just pop this slide up. So this outlines all the upcoming intakes for 25-26. They are in sequential order. So you'll notice that volunteer fire department, this one is closing at the end of the month, and then you've got a little bit more time for the other intakes. And Sasha and I will move into further detail on each of these funding programs, but not to worry, these deadlines are all on our website. And like Danita said, the slide deck will be shared after the presentation. So launching first into volunteer and composite fire departments, equipment and training. So the intent of this program is to enable fire departments to prepare for and respond to emergencies through training and the purchase of, as Danita already outlined, essential equipment. So ongoing operational costs and the purchase of major fire apparatus are not eligible. This intake, like Danita said, unlike previous intakes, is prescriptive. So What that means is that only the training and equipment listed in the program guide, as Dina said, there's multiple tables. So it's table 1, 2, and 3 are eligible. So we strongly advise that applicants refer to these tables when drafting their applications and budgets. And when we say refer to these tables, we even mean copy and paste the equipment from these tables into your budgets. And if you have already submitted, which some communities have, their applications, you can certainly reach out to UBCM. And if you feel like you haven't done this, you can certainly revise it as well. And then the other piece is that requests for structural fire and requests for wildland fire must be separated in the application and budget. So this is different from previous years. And then, as always, eligible applicants include First Nations, local governments, improvement districts that are established to provide fire protection services, and society-run fire departments in good standing. Right, then we move on to Indigenous cultural safety and cultural humility training. So this funding stream is to support eligible applicants to enhance cultural safety and humility in the delivery of local emergency management programs and services. So this includes education for emergency management personnel, those training to become emergency management professionals, and others working in emergency management systems. This education could be on the history of Indigenous peoples, the concept of cultural safety and cultural humility, and their relevance to Indigenous peoples. All right, and then moving on to emergency operations centers. So the intent of this funding stream is to support the purchase of, again, essential equipment and supplies required to maintain or improve EOCs and to enhance EOC capability through training and exercises. So the definition of emergency operations center has been updated. So the EOC is a function established by an organization or jurisdiction to coordinate the overall organizational response and support to an emergency. So that means that EOCs can be fixed location, temporary facility, mobile operations, or virtual structures with staff participating remotely. So that said, the purchase of essential equipment and supplies can be for a bricks and mortar EOC as well as a mobile EOC. Also eligible this year is the purchase and installation of off-site equipment that will support communication and external data collection specific to the function of the EOC. And as always, training and exercises for EOC staff are eligible. So exercises that support increasing EOC capacity, that could be tabletop exercises, that could be mock earthquake, fire, flood emergencies to practice the activation of an EOC. And then we're gonna just keep reiterating this with every slide, but similar to the other streams, it is also prescriptive. So again, table 1, make sure to reference that when you are drafting your applications and budgets. All right, and then I think you're done with me for a little while. I'm going to hand it off to Sasha to speak to the other programs. Oh, Sasha, you're on mute.
Thanks so much. I'm new here. No, I'm not. I'm going to speak to a couple more funding programs, too, that have been well established over the past few years, and then also our new funding program on the foundations of disaster risk reduction. But starting us off is our emergency support services equipment and training. That deadline is coming up in mid-November. The intent of this funding stream, as always, is to support eligible applicants to build local capacity to provide those emergency support services through ESS volunteer and responder recruitment, retention and training, and the purchase of, again, that word, essential ESS equipment. As noted in the slide, and you've probably realized, we did adjust the deadline for this intake in order to support applicants to include the registration for the NEST conference in their applications. We found that in previous years, the January intake deadline made it a little tight for folks to register for NEST, so we want to have that available should communities be interested in including that in their application. Certain things that are eligible are similar to previous intakes, including essential supplies and equipment for reception centers and group lodgings, equipment for ESS modernization, including computers, printers, and mobile devices, as well as training and exercises for ESS responders and exercises specific to ESS. And there are quite a few courses listed in the program guide. And so we do ask you to really pay attention to those courses, as we are limiting the eligibility to the items in Table 1 of the guide. And just something to keep in mind as well, that if you did apply and were approved under the January 2025 intake and you intend to apply for the November 2025 intake, please be sure to clearly distinguish between the activities that were approved in your January application to this November application. So we want to make sure that they are distinct projects so that we can make sure that they are different. And then I'm going to move along to our upcoming funding stream. We don't have a lot of information yet on this one, as the program guides are still being developed, but they will be available shortly. Once they are available, it will be announced in our weekly e-newsletter, The Compass. So if you are not registered for that, I highly recommend signing up for that one. It comes out every week. The general intent of this funding stream is to align with the Category 1 activities and Category 2 activities that were in the previous DRRCA funding stream. And those were, for Category 1, generally risk assessments, risk mapping and planning. And then Category 2 was generally non-structural activities like land use planning and education. Moving on to the sort of latest in our calendar is the public notification and evacuation route planning funding stream. The deadline is the end of April 2026. And this one supports eligible applicants to develop evacuation route plans and or public notification plans that provide information for First Nations, local governments, and community members in the event of an emergency. There is information in Table 1 of the program guide that shows the recommended content for each of these plans, and the eligible activities must result in the completion of a new or updated evacuation route plan or a public notification plan. And there are some further details in Section 6 of the program guide as well. And so one thing to keep in mind about this funding stream as well, is that while the overall development or routine update of a standalone local emergency plan is not eligible, this funding stream can support incremental updates for new or updated evacuation or public notification plans that can be combined or embedded into other local emergency documents. And as always, if you have any questions, we're always happy to chat or answer emails and, run through any suggestions or ideas that you have to see if anything that you're planning would fit within any of these funding streams. And I think Lindsay's going to chat about some tips and tricks for all of our funding programs.
Thanks, Sasha. Sasha kind of stole the first bullet of my tips and tricks piece. But, for pre-application, like Sasha said, we at UBCM are here to support you in the full, from the beginning to the end of your project. So if you have some questions or are wondering around eligibility throughout any of these funding streams, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. And as well as if you feel like you're a bit delayed or you need extra support, extensions may be available for each of these funding streams. And then we, get to the application itself. And as we've hammered home from the beginning of this webinar to the end, is that Table 1 is your cheat sheet. All the activities should be pulled directly from here. If we're talking about volunteer fire departments, it would also be Table 2 and 3. The other piece is that right underneath Table 1, there is the ineligible costs and activities. So just make sure to read through those as well as you're putting together your application and budget, as those are important points to note. And so we recognize that resolutions can be challenging. And so we are now accepting letters of support from band managers, CAOs, and CFOs from single applicants requesting less than $50,000. So just make sure that your resolution or your letter of support indicates support for the proposed activities and overall grant management. So those pieces sometimes are missed, and we do have to go back to get those. So again, to reiterate, indicates the support for the proposed activities and overall grant management. And so then once your project is approved, we understand that as your project progresses, you may face delays and require an extension, or you may need, or the needs of your community may change, and the activities and costs allocated require an amendment. And so this is what the interim report form is for. So it's just on the UBCM website under general forms, and you would complete the section if it's an extension. It could be also an amendment, and as well as progress payments are eligible to be requested in this form. Progress payments of up to 75% can be requested. So complete this form, submit it to UBCM, and a program officer will touch base with you around that. And then the last piece of the puzzle is reporting. And so all of the final report forms are posted on our website. So we do that. We do it as soon as the program materials are launched. We launch the final report forms as well, so applicants know what the expectation is at the end of your project. And the questions in the final report form are a direct reflection of the questions in the application worksheet. So we always, just as we ask you to kind of refer to your budget when you're completing your final financial summary, I would do the same from your application to your final report form. And then kind of as the last reminder, Sasha, myself, Rebecca, our program administrator, Christina, we're all here and available to answer questions throughout the project from the beginning to the end. So please don't hesitate to reach out. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Danita to moderate the Q&A portion of presentation.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, Sasha. So I'll leave this up just for a minute here with some contact information. As a reminder, the slide deck is going to be shared, so you will be able to access it after. But essentially, if you want to contact us, cepf@ubcm.ca, or kind of flip it around to make it into a website, ubcm.ca/CEPF. So I think now, I noticed that some questions have come into the Q&A. So if we want to pull down the presentation for now, and then if we do have our colleagues from EMCR available to join the panel, Robin, if you're there, and Heather, I'm not sure if you have panelist status, but there's Robin. So just as a reminder, we're using the Q&A. We're not using the chat. If you're having any challenges with the Q&A, we do encourage you to use the raise hand function, and one of our program staff will be able to let me know that there's somebody wanting to ask a question verbally. So I see we've got a handful of questions in the Q&A already. Go ahead, keep adding your questions. We're going to do our best to get through them all. We do have lots of time. I will read them out and then hand them over to the panel to answer, or in the case that I might be the one to answer, I'll take them on myself. So the first one, I think I'll ask Robin to answer. It's in relation to the DRIF program. And the question is, does DRIF through EMCR replace DRRCA funding, or is the new Foundations of Disaster Risk Reduction replacing DRRCA?
Sure. Yeah, I would say that the funding programs are complementary to each other. So the Foundations of Disaster Risk Reduction stream will allow for non-structural applications that were previously under Category 1 and 2 of the DRRCA program. Whereas DRIF, while it has previously been open to the non-structural projects, will now be only currently open for structural expressions of interest, similar to that of Category 3 of the DRRCA.
Thanks, Robin. And then just for certainty, so folks understand, the DRCA, Disaster Risk Reduction Climate Adaptation, was a funding stream under CEPF. We ran 5 intakes, I believe, but that now has been closed. all those projects that were funded continue to exist and will be seen through to completion, but we will not be accepting any new applications.
Yeah.
Okay, a question around, a very specific funding or a very specific training program. I'm going to say, Tarina, we're going to have to get back to you, but the question is, would the Osgood Certificate in Fundamentals of Indigenous Peoples and Canadian Law program from York U be eligible? Don't know. We're going to have to look into that and get back to you. So if you are able, just to email that into CPF, our CPF email account. Otherwise, Lindsay, if you can note that one for to follow up. I mean, the one thing I will say, and I don't want to give the wrong answer, but generally speaking, in our funding programs, the training we offer is not intended to be sort of in-depth professional development, and we generally speaking don't fund sort of full diploma programs or components of diploma programs. So just to say that out loud, but we will absolutely look into the question and get back to you with the specific class you're asking about. So a question here. Could you please elaborate on the differences between intakes/programs for volunteer fire departments, ESS, EOC, equipment, and training? I mean, I can answer that one. So the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund is an umbrella that we operate multiple funding streams under. So currently there's 6 individual funding streams. Fire departments, ESS, and EOC are all distinct funding streams, funding the specific content area of each one. Each of those programs funds equipment and training relevant to the funding stream. So obviously EOC funding is for equipment and training for EOCs, etc. There's distinct program guides for each one and a separate table 1. In the case of fire departments, kind of some multiple tables for eligibility that would give you the really detailed information on what's eligible under each of those funding streams. Yes, the question about copy of the slide deck. The slide deck will be made available. A recording of this webinar will be made available. We typically do send an email out to the folks who have participated. It takes us a few days to get the recording posted up to our YouTube channel, but we will let folks know when everything's available. A question around OCAP, the also under cultural safety grant, the fundamentals of OCAP. I'm going to have to stretch my memory, but I believe we added the fundamentals of OCAP this year.
Yeah, we did. It is in there. It is eligible.
So that one is a yes. Okay, so another question for what will be the new Foundations of Disaster Risk Reduction. Will there be an equivalent Category 3 stream available? I believe that's what Robin was speaking to. So under the UBCM managed Community Emergency Preparedness Fund, the new intake will be limited to what was Category 1 and 2 under DRCA, which is generally planning and non-structural type responses or type activities for disaster risk reduction. And the DRIF program, which is managed by the province, will be focused more on the structural side. Okay, a question I'm going to hand over to Sasha for public notification. Does the public notification and evacuation route plan funding stream include funding for public notification technology solutions?
Hi, thanks, Danita. Unfortunately, it does not. It is strictly a planning grant, so it doesn't offer the opportunity to purchase equipment for public notification systems or subscriptions or service fees for any type of public notification systems.
Thank you, Sasha. Okay. So a question around sort of the budgeting side of submitting applications. I'm looking at a couple of applications and I assume we will need quotes for the various components for Table 1. Not necessarily. So you do at the application stage, we do ask for a detailed budget that aligns with the activities you include in your application. So if you know in your application, we'd like to do activities A, B, and C, then in the budget, we would like to see a cost estimate for A, B, and C. If you already have a relationship with your vendor and you have quotes available for the purchase of equipment, there's no harm in submitting those. But as a first step in your application, what we need is the application form and the detailed budget. If during the review process we had any questions, we may come back and say, can you provide any further information like vendor quotes? But they aren't always required. Okay, we have an ESS question, which I believe I will hand back to Sasha again, which is, are costs associated with ESS program development eligible, i.e. contractor to support site selection, training identification, volunteer recruitment planning, etc.?
Maybe. I'm sorry, it really depends on the intention behind what you're looking to do. The Table 1, as we've mentioned, has all of the eligible activities. So if the program development is in relation to purchasing equipment or developing training, then we can certainly discuss that. But I think we might need to have a little bit more information from you just to have a really fulsome answer to this one. If you could submit an email to the CEPF@ubcm.ca, we can certainly discuss this further before submitting an application.
Thank you, Sasha. Okay, will HRVAs, including wildfire, be eligible under the new Foundations of Disaster Risk Reduction grant? So yes and no. So saying out loud one more time, we've not developed the funding stream yet. The program materials are not written. The intent is that it's generally going to follow what was category 1 and 2 of DRRCA, but the ink is certainly not dry in anything yet. With that in mind, HRVAs in relation to climate and natural hazards would be eligible, with the exception of wildfire. We have a distinct funding stream, Fire Smart Community Funding and Supports, where community wildfire resiliency plans are fully funded. Because that other funding stream exists, CEPF doesn't fund risk assessment activities in relation to wildfire. But my expectation, and Robin, feel free to jump in if you think I'm going the wrong way here, is that the new Foundations for Disaster Risk Reduction would certainly include funding for risk assessments for natural and climate hazards. She's nodding. Okay. So a question around volunteer fire department funding. So with the volunteer fire department funding, it says structure versus wildfire need to be separated on the application and budget. Often equipment crosses over and it is used for both applications. How to deal with this? I think you just do what you just did and you just state that it's for both. Certainly there are some, what in previous intakes, radios actually came up a number of times, obviously used in any type of response. So I would say if there are pieces that are in both, you're always welcome to submit a separate document or additional information with your application. You could submit a budget that has, what's distinct to structure, what's distinct to wildfire, and what's for both. And just so folks can understand why we're asking for that, the eligibility is different. The tables of eligible equipment are different between structure fire and response to wildland fire. And we went back to a lot of applications and applicants in the last intake who kind of lumped everything together, and we couldn't determine eligibility easily. And so it's to help move the process along faster. It's also going to help us get the application under the review of the right subject matter expert when we get to the process of technical review. So yeah, if you've got things that are for both, just tell us it's for both, and we can make sure folks understand that when they're scoring your applications. Lindsay's been waiting quietly, and I now have an EOC question for her. So for the EOC equipment and training grant, it was a long one too. For the EOC equipment and training grant, would virtual infrastructure be an eligible expense? The regional district runs an EOC that is almost exclusively virtual, and we're interested in hiring a contractor to develop a SharePoint site into a robust virtual EOC platform. Would the contractor to develop this virtual infrastructure be an eligible grant-funded activity? I'm sensing you're going to get another maybe answer, but we'll see what Lindsay says.
Yeah, Mike, this is a great question. And certainly we did update the definition of EOCs to be, fixed locations, temporary facilities, mobile operations, or virtual structures. And so, I think it certainly needs to demonstrate that, the activities that you're proposing maintain or improve the EOC's operations and capacity. So again, similar to Sasha's answer, I think if you want to take this offline with me and we can discuss it a little bit further, just to figure out the nuts and bolts of it, we can see what we can do.
The only thing I'd maybe add to that response is we have in past intakes had very few, but a handful of applications proposing kind of the concept of like information dashboards and other kinds of platforms that were very robust and honestly very expensive IT projects. And if memory serves, they've all been declined. Um, Largely, well, I mean, not largely, because in some cases, because other funding wasn't available and what we could fund was only a small portion of the overall project. But with the focus now being very much on essential equipment, this would be something we'd want to look at in a bit more detail and understand, just as Lindsay said, how it would fit with the new structure of the program guides. All right, the questions keep on coming. This is great. So for most grants, it was mentioned that the grants are prescriptive and that we should be focusing on Table 1 eligible items. Does this mean the additional eligible costs and activities from the application guide are no longer eligible? Specifically asking about ESS, but this is across all of our program guides. So if you open up one of our program guides, almost all of our program guides look the same in the sense that Table 1 has all your eligible activities. Directly below that, there's a section called Additional Costs and Activities. And that has things like incremental staff time. I'm trying to think of some examples, presentations to chief and council, council and board, etc., public meetings. Those remain eligible, but they have to be directly related to an activity that's in Table 1. It's not sort of an additional activity or something different. So it's not staff time to do general emergency management. It's staff time to actually undertake the activities that are identified in Table 1 if you're a community who would like to do that with your internal staff resourcing. So that section, and as Lindsay spoke to before, the ineligible section right below that still remain in the program guides, still eligible and ineligible costs identified there. But the really key thing to keep in mind is that those additional costs are only eligible provided they are directly related to an activity in Table 1. Okay. Oops, gotta make sure I'm going in order here. Okay, I don't know, Robin, you might have to help me out because there's an acronym in here that I don't know. Does equipment or resources for setting up a CALS, C-A-L-S, fall into one of these funding streams?
I
Or if
am
anybody
not
happens
familiar with that acronym. I don't know if
So,
Lindsay or Sasha.
Denova, looks like this is your question. If you want to type in a follow-up question spelling out that acronym for us, my sense is if we don't know what the acronym is, it's unlikely that it's in our program guides, but if you could let us know, what funding stream you're speaking to and what that acronym is, we would be more than happy to, continue on with that question. Question around the Building Resilient Communities Conference. Will this be available for funding this year? No, it's not available. Generally speaking, NEST is eligible, the wildfire resiliency. So NEST is eligible under ESS funding. The Wildfire Resiliency Training Summit has been eligible under the Volunteer and Composite funding stream program. And generally speaking, all other conferences are ineligible. Okay, so a question around, oh, this is like crystal ball gazing. See if we can guess what's going to happen. But what is the current / anticipated approval rate for CEPF programs? E.g., how many are applied to the volunteer funding stream in 2024, and how many grants were awarded? So unfortunately, it's not an apples to apples comparison. So the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund benefited from, more than $365 million in the bank. So we ran intakes for a number of years where all applications with merit that aligned with the funding stream and that were recommended for funding were funded. And we didn't have to work within, necessarily, to some degree we did, but generally speaking, we didn't have to work within nominal funding allocations per funding stream. That is changing moving forward. We will be working within a set amount of money per funding stream over the next 3 fiscal years. And while there might be a small amount of flexibility moving forward, generally speaking, we're down for about 10%-ish of the overall fund. And so in order to forecast over 3 years of funding, we will be operating within nominal allocations. So almost impossible to compare because those two scenarios are incredibly different. That said, I think the first year of volunteer fire department funding, we had, I know, Sasha, can you remind me, like 185 applications or something pretty wild? And we funded about 100. Based on the dollars.
200, I think.
Sorry, do you want to say that again?
It was nearly 200 applications, I believe.
Nearly 200. And we funded just over 100 of them, I believe, based on eligibility and then based on available funding. So I can't give you firm numbers. I can't really compare it to past intakes because the world has changed and we're not benefiting from a bank account with $300 million in it anymore, unfortunately. As we said at the beginning, we are expecting to be highly oversubscribed in front of some of the funding streams. And that means that unfortunately, projects that otherwise would have been recommended and funded won't be because we won't have enough money for all of the applications with merit. Okay, so another question related to DRIF. So Robin, I'll probably hand this back over to you again. So follow up to DRIF. Will this past intake, still under EOI review, still consider Stream 1, Category 1 and 2 DRRCA equivalent funding then? I'm assuming DRIF will transition to only considering structural activities once FDRR goes live.
Yeah, I can speak to that. So any EOIs that were submitted through the DRIF program, so expressions of interest up until the UBCM convention, would have been considered for this past intake of funding. But however, around the time that the UBCM convention occurred, which was just a few weeks ago, we had closed the portal. So any EOIs that are currently in pool or being under review are still going to be considered for funding. However, anything moving forward will just not be, you can't even submit an application for them at this point.
Thanks, Robin.
Yep.
Okay. So question for EOC equipment, would SUP equipment still be an acceptable purchase under EOC? If not, do they fit anywhere?
It's been edited to say SPU equipment.
Oh, okay. I was just going to say, I instantly thought stand-up paddleboard, and I was like, we're not, no, not what we fund. We have not I don't know that we've ever funded structural protection equipment under EOCs. Our volunteer fire department funding stream, and then moving to our fire department, or excuse me, to our Fire Smart Community Funding and Supports program, are definitely places where we fund Fire Smart structure protection unit equipment. So not under EOC, but under those other funding stream, and then the Fire Smart funding program. Just making sure. Oh, okay. Sorry, the questions just all closed on me. There we got the back up again. Okay. So will there be more funding for volunteer fire departments in the future? I hope so. I know that's not a very positive answer. Right now, we have, looking at the table that I shared with the funding intakes over the next 3 years, that will be the end of the current dollars that UBCM is administering for the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund. And in those 3 years, there is only one intake in a couple weeks' time for volunteer fire departments. It's our hope that in the 3 years that we've scheduled intakes out for, the provincial government will be in a position to, at some point in time, to reinvest the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund. I think we're all hearing clear messaging and sort of the current fiscal state for the province, that that's not going to happen in the next budget cycle. But we are hopeful that in time that the province is able to continue the funding. So that's my hopeful answer. But the honest answer is, within the remaining dollars we're administering, there will only be one more intake. Oh, okay. So going back to the acronym that we didn't know, the CALS acronym. So the acronym is Cultural Activity Locations Space.
And then there's further information on that up in another comment, another question.
Oh, further up?
Yeah.
Okay, I see now. I'm just going to jump to that one, and then I will go back down to the other questions. So the Cultural Activity Location Support, CALS, originated out of the recognition that First Nations peoples, cultures, languages, and spiritual beliefs play a vital role in their well-being. Culturally sensitive evacuee care is a crucial component of meeting the needs of First Nations experiencing displacement through culturally appropriate trauma-informed services. I'd say our program guides don't, in terms of our Indigenous cultural safety funding stream, I don't think we use that language anywhere. But it's certainly something we can take back to our partners at EMCR and look if that is something that could and should fit within that funding stream. I will just take a moment to say, even though we have said repeatedly that the program guides have become prescriptive, the two that still have probably the highest degree of flexibility are the Indigenous cultural safety and humility training funding stream, which has learning outcomes and a really clear program intent. But it's just not the same, obviously, as buying equipment, right? We want communities to propose cultural humility training that makes sense for their community, and for what makes the most sense for the nations they're working with. So there is definitely, I would say, more flexibility within that funding stream to propose activities, because if you have a look at that at the table 1 in there, you'll see it's not nearly as specific as the table 1 would be, for example, for ESS or EOC. So I would certainly reach out to one of our staff. We can talk about this one a little bit more, but just noting that, sorry, I said 2, then I only talked about 1. The 2 funding streams that are a little bit more flexible are the Indigenous cultural safety, for the reasons that I just spoke to, and then public notification, evacuation, route planning, because that funding stream speaks to recommended content, not prescribed content, in terms of the completion of your plan. So Denova, please reach out to us. We'd love to talk about this a little bit more and understand, if indeed it is the Indigenous cultural safety funding stream, how that would fit. Okay, so I'm moving around here, back to where I was. Okay, a question for EMCR. what is the rationale to not fund BRC, Building Resilience Conference, when there are training sessions for emergency managers, emergency management EOCs as part of the conference schedule, and EMCR staff performing engagement at the conference? And Robin, I'll let you speak, but if you want to, I can provide a bit more context historically as to why it's not been funded as well.
Yeah, maybe do you want to kick it off, Danita, and I
Sure.
can jump in if I have something to add? Yeah.
One of the challenges we've had is that the agenda for the Building Resilient Communities conference typically isn't available when the grant applications are due under Community Emergency Preparedness Fund. There has been some years under that conference where the training is, generally emergency management focused. But, for example, one year, a lot of the training was really focused on health systems and the delivery of healthcare in emergency systems, which is outside the scope of ESS and EOC funding, the way CEPF funds it, not the concepts outside the scope of funding. And so we had no way of knowing. We had no way of knowing if what communities were applying for in terms of attending a conference, if they would even be covering the eligible courses that we have for ESS and EOC. So it was really a timing issue by large, and the decision was then also made that we were going to move away from funding conferences altogether, with NEST and the Wildfire Resiliency Training Summit being the two exceptions. Did you want to add anything, Robin, or is that helpful?
No, I think that should be
okay.
Good. Yeah.
Thank you. I did see somebody's hand go up, so I just wanted to pause to see if we had somebody wanting to ask a question verbally. Claudia, do you want to hop in if somebody's trying to?
Yeah, Danita, I don't see anyone raising their hands. Okay. I recommend if folks do want to ask a question live, that they just quickly pop that in the Q&A, that they would like to ask a question live, and I can enable their microphone and camera at that time.
Thanks, Claudia. Okay, what is the basis for the $30,000 limit? Is it due to your bank fund/funds being decreased? Yes. I mean, it's unfortunate. We had to make, honestly, some challenging decisions working with the province in terms of how we would keep CEPF running in a time when there's very little certainty of new funds being contributed to the program. So the programs that were at 40,000 were reduced to 30, so that we would be able to run, at least for ESS and EOC, 3 more annual intakes. Robin, did you want to add anything there?
No, I would agree. It's just to stretch it out as much as we can.
Okay, so I saw you kind of, your head moved, and
Sorry,
I wasn't sure if you were trying to get in. Okay, so just curious, given the change in times and the transition to AI and more reliance on technology, do any of these funding streams cover cybersecurity education and the procurement of new tech to help keep data safe as it pertains to community disaster planning, EOC, ESS, and critical technology-based infrastructure? Either of our program staff want to take that one on? That's a lot of shaking of heads. I guess it's me. So, I mean, I would say yes and no. Under ESS and EOC, I mean, IT purchases are eligible. I think we have seen some IT purchases. I can think under ESS, and I'm not an IT person, so I'm probably not going to use the right words here, but some purchases in relation to protection of personal information that was being collected for ESS at ESS registration. I don't think we have anything explicit in relation to AI. So, I mean, if you do have something specific in mind in terms of information technology and the funding streams, I would really encourage you to reach out. The general bucket of IT does exist as an eligible purchase with some restrictions for both ESS and EOC. So there might be some applicability there or eligibility there, but probably best if you reach out to us and we could talk through some specifics. Still lots of questions. You guys are doing great here. I love it. Okay. Okay, so what if we were having trouble accessing the BCEID for the funding application due to staffing changes? So you might be thinking about applying to government. I don't know if the BCEIDs are required for DRIF or accessing the portal, Robin, but for UBCM funding programs, we're outside of government and there's no relationship to BCEID concerns here. So I didn't read the rest of the question. I just stopped to kind of course correct concerns around job action and things like BCEID not being necessarily maintained on the provincial side. So for UBCM programs, we don't. You just go to our website, takes you to an online application, two-step process. You start your application online and then you receive the worksheet to provide the details. So we don't have the functionality of BCEID. Robin, is that something that exists on your side?
It could be impacting a DRIF application if that's what they're speaking about. And if so, I would just encourage you to reach out to emcr.drifprogram@gov.bc.ca and we can sort something out.
Thank you, Robin.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think there is an opportunity to advocate in our respective roles the rationale to continue strategic funding priorities to align ministry strategy/objectives. Is that clear? i.e., there are multiple ministries that have strategic objectives that may intersect. The challenge is the disconnect as a result. So I'm not sure what the question is in here. So if Kula, who put in this question, oh, your hand is up. Did you want to speak? Claudia, could we let the participant speak?
Your mic is enabled now, so you should be able to speak.
Well, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for allowing me to speak. Oh, what I was talking about is the challenges that are discussed here and how the funding criteria is changing and whether or not funding will be available for certain priorities or projects, which is very challenging for the overall development of an emergency management program. And I was thinking that in our respective roles, there's space for advocacy, given that rationale of the disconnect between various ministries and strategic objectives that exist under each, although they do intersect. So it's that disconnect between ministries where I think there could be some advocacy for either extending the current funding or maintaining the need for those specific foundational strategic objectives and priorities. Thanks. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Robin, did you want to respond to the comment?
I think that we're open to future discussions if they want to reach out direct about any gaps between multiple ministries, but I'm not necessarily sure exactly how to respond to this question as it stands right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. So somebody has shared that the building resilience agenda is available now. Thank you for sharing that. Unfortunately, the program or that conference does remain ineligible, but we can certainly look at that in the future. Sorry, I'm getting out of order here. Okay, there we go. Yes, Tarina has corrected me. I am mixing up conferences. The Building Resiliencies Community Conference is only in its second year. It's not the EPBC conference, which is what I was talking about. So apologies for that. I do stand corrected. It is the EPBC conference where one of the years the agenda was very much focused on healthcare and the emergency management context. So I think I'm going to go back to the broader context, which is that across the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund, the decision was made that we wouldn't fund conferences, with the two exceptions of NEST and the Wildfire Resiliency Training Summit. The Fire Smart program, for those of you who participate in Fire Smart Community Funding and Supports, we used to have a bit more space for more broadly funding a category of professional development, which was often used to attend conferences. And then we did have a space for some other conferences. Those have also all been removed in past years under Fire Smart Community Funding and Supports. Again, we only fund the Wildfire Resiliency Training Summit. So certainly something we can take away, take back to the management committee for more discussion around the funding of conferences. But as it stands right now, the eligibility is set for the intakes that are advertised and do have live intakes right now. I think the next comment is just building on the previous comment where the speaker was able to add their comment verbally. So I'm going to move past that one. Will a recording of the webinar be made available? Yes, recording of the webinar, copy of the slide deck will be made available. Maybe take us a few days to get it up posted on YouTube where we can send out a link, but we will let everyone know when it's available. Back to the issue of the BCEID, just an FYI, also had issues with accessing BCEID for some of my applications and action items. It is likely affecting many more than just us two.
Yeah, noted. Thank you so much to both of you that have brought that up. I flagged it for our drift program lead on the EMCR side, and I would just continue to encourage you to reach out to the generic drift inbox. You can find that email on the website.
Thanks, Robin. So question on Fire Smart funding, not under the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund, but let's talk other funding. So do you anticipate the Fire Smart funding to disappear in the future? So Fire Smart Community Funding and Supports, we did announce our 2026 intake in the summer. That just opened for applications earlier this month. So we are open for the 2026 year. That will stay open as long as funding permits. And that program does allow communities to apply for up to 2 years of funding. So we are hopeful that we will fund as many communities as possible under remaining dollars in the 2026 year. And again, lots of conversations are happening with the province around what's possible in terms of reinvesting that program as well. Okay, so that was the last question. We do have a little bit of time left, so I'll just pause for a moment, see if anyone wants to add something to the Q&A or raise your hand. Maybe while we're doing that, I will just look to our panel just to see if any of our panelists had something they thought might come up as a question, something they thought they would be commenting on that they didn't get a chance to, or anything else they might want to add to share with our participants. Okay, a question has popped up, so I'm going to jump back over to the Q&A, and then we'll likely wrap things up a bit early today. So regarding the Indigenous cultural safety and humility training, but also potentially relevant to other intakes, given that the program is likely to be oversubscribed, with applicants who submit their applications prior to the intake deadline be reviewed, approved prior to the deadline, or will all applications be held until the intake deadline and reviewed all at once? So these are competitive grant programs. And all of our funding streams, there is no sort of, first one in the door kind of consideration. All eligible applications received for all funding streams before the deadline will all be reviewed together. And then the selection committee will have to make some tough choices if we're oversubscribed in terms of which applications are funded. And just to sort of actually add to that, in our program, all of our program guides, we do speak to the evaluation process. So there is a section in the program guide that folks can have a look at. All applications are scored. There's weighting. There's minimum thresholds in terms of scores. And then the evaluation committee also has the discretion to look at provincial distribution, provincial priority, and other kind of qualitative factors in terms of, in the cases that were oversubscribed, how the dollars are allocated. Oh, I thought it was another question, but it was just somebody saying thank you. So thank you for that. I'm not seeing any hands raised. I'm not seeing any further questions. So I think we will wrap up. I want to offer, somebody just snuck one in. So maybe I'll take this last question if we can, which is, will the current strike have any effects on funding intakes? Good question. Possibly. UBCM staff are grant administrators. We are not subject matter experts. So we are, with the fire department funding stream closing first, likely that will move to adjudication in late December, early New Year. Fingers crossed, job actions resolved by then, and we have our subject matter experts available to us again. And if not, we will be working with the province on a business continuity plan to do our best to keep the programs moving forward, and to do our best to stay within the adjudication windows that we do take very seriously. But that said, these are merit-based programs, and we do need subject matter experts to score within that set of criteria. So, like I said, fingers crossed that by time we're actually adjudicating, job action will be resolved. Okay, now I'm going to thank our panelists for taking the time today, especially Robin for joining us today, helping us prepare and answering questions today. Thanks to everyone who joined. I think we had sort of 140, 150 people at the peak, which was great. It's always great to have such a good turnout for these sessions. As we've said repeatedly, please reach out. Any questions, anything we can do to help you be successful, whether that's in a project you currently have funded or an application you're thinking about submitting, our team is here to help you. So with that, thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day and have a great night.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.